find really fun. Well, I can't say that I have a favorite between Revolutionary War history and the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and modern day government, but today is definitely going to be super exciting. So raise your hand if you've heard any news about the presidential elections coming up. Okay, I'm seeing some raised hands. So can anyone tell me who's going to be running for president?
Raise your hand if you know who's running for
Who's
president.
going to run for president?
Jalen.
Barack Obama.
Right, Barack Obama. So he's the incumbent, which is a fancy word for, so he was already elected and now he's running again for a second term. And does anyone know who's running against him?
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney? Great. So you guys already know one of the basic, probably really exciting things about government, which is the presidential elections, and there's tons of other elections too. Does anyone know who else gets elected? What are some other examples of people in government who get elected?
Maisie?
Vice president? Okay, well the vice president will run on the same ticket as the president, so it's kind of like a package deal. Yep, when you elect the president, the vice president comes along. Great. Who else gets elected? So we know the president, the vice president, who else?
How about your state or local government, ladies and gentlemen? Think about state or local officials. One shirt up front.
Governor.
Governor, great. Governor gets elected. Perfect. And can anyone name like one more official who gets elected?
Can you think of, when we're talking about the branches of government last week, some of those people that get elected? Andrew?
Actually,
No,
the secretaries of cabinets are appointed. So when you elect a president, then they will appoint secretaries. However, there are definitely some people in a certain branch of government that get elected.
Werner? No,
I'm sorry.
he said judges. He
Judges.
said judges.
Okay, so like on the Supreme Court, that's actually another appointed position. So the president will appoint judges to the Supreme Court when there's a vacancy. Those judges have to be approved in Congress, but it's, the president appoints, so actually not elected. But there's definitely people, here's a hint, who represents you in Washington, D.C.? Who represents you?
Who represents you? Who represents you?
Good. He said the representatives.
Representatives, yay! So representatives get elected, and so do senators. So representatives, there's a whole lot more of them. 435 representatives in the House of Representatives, and 100 senators, 2 for each state. So the representatives are really like more directly involved, I guess you could say, at a local level because there are so many of them, more per state. And today in the Kids Guide to U.S. Government Part 2, we're going to be talking about representatives, talking about senators. We're even going to discuss an issue that we all care about and how you could write a letter to your representative about it. So we'll be doing lots of fun things today. But first, I want to ask you guys a pretty important question. And if you want to turn off the lights now, you could go ahead. Why should we care about government?
Adora,
Yes.
quick second.
Mhm.
We lost your picture. We can hear you just fine, but I'm going to dial out.
Oh, okay.
Hang up and dial back in. I'll be
Okay.
right back, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, we got you back.
Okay, great. Good to see you again. So here we go. Very important question. Why should we care about government? And this is really your answer. It's not a right or wrong answer. But just why should you and I care about government?
Oh, we have seen 2 people answering it.
Oh, yeah.
Just raise your hand. Why should we care about government, ladies and gentlemen? Giovanni, go ahead.
So we know how it's run.
So we don't, so could you say that again a little louder?
We know how it's run.
So we know it's run. That's a great reason to care about government. But also, like, let's take that further. Why should we care about how government is run?
Think about it. Why do you care? Why should you care?
It gives us our rights.
It gives us rights and passes laws that affect us. That's a great answer. And any other reasons?
Don't you care about the people that are running this country or making laws for you? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Think. What do you, okay, so does
Okay.
it matter?
So let me ask you a question. Let's say that a new law has been passed, and it requires that everyone under the age of 17 must not play video games for longer than 1 hour per month. How would you feel?
Per month.
Or how would you feel about that?
Does it matter to you?
So raise
No.
your hand. Raise your hand if you would. Raise your hand if you would support this law.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm seeing
Yes,
a few brave people who support 1 hour of video games per month. You can't go over that. All right. Now, who would not like this law? Who would not support it?
You would not like.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of raised hands too. So here we have an example of why you should care about government. Because sure, probably it's unlikely that there will ever be a law saying you can't play video games for more than 1 hour a month. If that's illegal. And in fact, it would probably go against a lot of rights to pass a law like that. But there are laws that affect you as directly in as everyday and meaningful ways as such an imaginary law like that might. So for instance, if you think about laws that have been passed that affect free speech and what you can do with distributing materials, there have been things that affect what's in movies that people watch, the kind of things that are allowed online, what websites can be open. So there was a big actually debate recently because of free speech versus how much we want to protect the web. All these different kinds of debates affect you and I, maybe not necessarily right now, but in 5 or 10 years, as much as a lot of video games. So there are all kinds of laws that you should become interested in and think, do I care about this? Do I care about the decisions that are being made? Another great example comes from, especially right after Memorial Day, comes from the war in Iraq. And that required people in Congress to sign off on it. And so if you think about it, the decisions that your representatives and senators make on one day or in 1 week can have really long-reaching impacts, in this case with a war, in other cases with a law or with a bill. So that's why we should care about government, because it really affects us, and when it comes down to it, government isn't like this big separate block of people that doesn't affect us. We're very much interconnected. And when we elect officials, we're electing them to serve us. So, what does government do? Any ideas? What does government do?
What does government do?
Christopher, what does the government do?
Makes laws, great. Okay, makes laws. What else?
Maddie?
Makes things fair.
I'm sorry?
Makes things fair.
Makes things fair. Okay, great. So judicial system, things like that. Great. What else?
Declare war.
I'm sorry?
Declare war.
Declares war. Yep. Anything else?
What does the president do? Give your answer. What does the president do in the executive office? Executive branch. Sean?
Sorry?
Yes, laws.
He passes, so he can either accept or reject a law. He can pass it or veto it, which is a pretty important power. So yes, government has all kinds of different powers that affect our lives. They also, so here are some things, many of these are managed at a more local government level, but say infrastructure management. So how many of you have ever been in a car on a road before? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing lots of raised hands. Pretty much everyone. Now, have any of you ever seen construction going on a road? Seeing lots of raised hands too. All right, so that's where government comes in. As long as, if it's a public road and if it's one that you're driving on, you see construction going on, then that's probably paid for by local government. And sometimes there are also national grants, federal grants that can go to local governments to help pay for infrastructure and national infrastructure projects. So there's infrastructure management, that's things like highways, roads, buildings. Public education, so schools, Even some state universities also get some funding. A lot of the funding for public education comes from federal and local governments. Ensuring freedom of individual rights. So this is something that ties back to what we talked about in the first part of A Kid's Guide to U.S. Government. So, do any of you remember the First Amendment of the Constitution? Raise your hand if you remember the First Amendment. You don't have to remember in exact words. It doesn't have to be exact words, just the gist of it. Okay, so does anyone want to tell me what's in the First Amendment?
Freedom of religion.
I'm sorry.
Freedom of religion.
Freedom of living. Well, close, but not quite. Think about it. Oh, freedom of religion. Great. Okay. Yes. So freedom of religion is included in the First Amendment. Great. There's also a couple other things included in the First Amendment. Any other idea?
Corey.
Assembly.
Freedom of assembly. Great. So people can gather together, and that might include, say, like a peaceful protest. It could include things like Occupy Wall Street, for instance, and those are rights. The right to assemble is actually something that people in a lot of other countries do not have. And what is another very important right in the First Amendment?
Chloe? Say it louder. Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, great. When you open your mouth, when you want to say something that might be kind of controversial, that people would disagree with, you can thank the First Amendment. So all these important rights that we have from the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, Third Amendment, well, pretty much like all the amendments in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the rest of the Constitution, we are ensured that we can have those by a government that, makes sure that whatever laws they pass aren't going to infringe on individual rights. So there are multiple safeguards to try to ensure that that original idea that we have real freedom as a people. So the Supreme Court decides whether things are constitutional or not. It looks at laws that can be debated. So does anyone know any examples of Supreme Court case?
Anybody know anything about the Supreme Court
We
case?
went to a play, theater works in high school, what was that Supreme Court case about?
Do you remember that?
Color of justice.
But what was it about?
Black people being separate, segregation.
Okay.
Okay, great. So was the play about Brown versus Board of Education?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, so Brown versus Board of Education is a great example of a Supreme Court case that really changed life for many people in the United States. Really very important, a hallmark case. So Brown versus Board of Education, if you guys saw a play about it, you would know, was that in a lot of places it was segregated. So African Americans and whites would go their separate ways at school, at public places, even drinking from separate water fountains. And the idea was that this was separate but equal because of a previous Supreme Court case, but the Supreme Court overturned it in this case with a little girl who wanted to go to the school, even though it was a white school that was nearby her, and said that separate but equal really couldn't stand when facilities were separate and very unequal. So, extremely important case. And that shows you how the Supreme Court and other bodies of government really attempt to protect those constitutional freedoms that we all have. And so sometimes it works out really well, sometimes there's a lot of debate, but overall, one of the aims of government is supposed to be to ensure those freedoms that are guaranteed to us in the Constitution. Making laws, so we were talking about that imaginary law with the video games. Haven't done any laws like that, but you definitely want to be aware of any new laws, or any bills, I should say, that are introduced and that may become law. Protecting the nation and its citizens, so like if some of you maybe attended Memorial Day services, but you know about the military, there's also policemen and firemen, and women, I should say. And emergency management, so after hurricanes, tornadoes, any emergencies, they might send in like National Guard or any other emergency agencies. And managing public spaces is another big government duty. So that is not in any way a comprehensive list. There are many more things that could fall under this question, but those are just a few examples. And many of us see these things in action every day. So if you've ever seen emergency services like an ambulance or a fire truck, or if you go to a public school, which you guys should be pretty familiar with, or if you have driven on a road. You know, these are all things that you know are affected or are directly supported by government. So, here's another imaginary bill, or a new law that has been introduced that would make it mandatory for youth 5 to 17 to eat at least 3 servings of vegetables per day. Those who do not eat 3 servings of vegetables must give up dessert privileges for 1 week. Alright, so let's take a quick measure, see how you guys feel about this. Who likes this law? Raise your hand. I'm seeing some raised hands. We have some vegetable lovers here, that's amazing. Great, okay, and who is not so fond of this law? Raise your hand. Alright, I'm seeing a lot of raised hands, wow. Okay, so you're looking at this law and you're thinking, I really like this or I really don't like this. But the question is, what can you do next? If you see a bill that's going to become a law and you really think, I have to do something to stop this or I have to do something to support this, what is a next step you can take?
Do know what you can do to support it or try to have it not go through? Any ideas? Somebody on the floor.
Go ahead, Drew.
Going to trial.
Go on to trial? Well, actually, there's a slightly more easier. So if you really wanted to, you could say that you could maybe bring up a civil rights suit and say this goes against my rights, that to make me eat things that I don't want to is violating like the rights that I have in the Constitution. You could definitely do that and say, okay, I'm going to sue against this law. However, there could be an easier way to go about it too. Any ideas? What might be a slightly easier way to go about it?
Who makes the laws? I assume who makes the laws?
So who represents you?
Yeah.
Sean,
Well.
not just the president.
Yeah, but who?
Who did the,
Who works in the Capitol building?
yes,
The representatives.
The representatives, great. So the representatives really represent you pretty directly. They go to Washington, D.C. and they're supposed to bring what their constituents, that's a fancy word for the people that they represent in that region, so all of you. And they're supposed to bring what their constituents want and what their constituents don't want and represent that. So if a representative receives hundreds of letters and phone calls saying, no, don't support this law, then they might reconsider, or they might think, okay, maybe I should work against this. My constituents are not super happy. So does anyone know who your representative is? This one might be a bit of a challenge.
Anybody know who the representative of this area is?
Okay, well, if you don't know, then I actually went ahead, because I'm not in New York, so I wouldn't know who your representative is. I looked up who my representative was, but I also looked up who your representative was, so I think that this is correct. You're in Rochester, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you just go to house.gov, which is the website for the United States House of Representatives, and then you can actually use your zip code and your city to look up who your representative is. So you guys are in the 29th Congressional District of New York, and your representative is Tom Reed. So if there was a bill that was introduced, similar to that vegetable one, you could write to Mr. Reed and say, here's what I think about it. So letter to a representative is a great way to make your voice heard. Now, anyone know what age you have to be to vote?
how old do you have to be to vote?
18.
Sean.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. 18 years old. Sorry, I got a little ahead of you. Great, and it actually used to be that you had to be 21 to vote, and then they lowered it to 18. So that's pretty awesome, fewer years to wait. So when you're 18 and you finally get to vote, then you can make decisions based on who you feel will best represent you. So for example, if Mr. Reed, you feel that he's not listening to your letters or something, or you feel that Mr. Reed is doing a really good job, then you could choose to elect or not elect somebody. All right, back to the presentation. So by better understanding our government, we really empower ourselves. We can stand up for the things that we believe in and fight against the things that we don't. Now here's a little bit more about the three branches of government. Does anyone know what those three branches are? Someone want to throw them out?
Somebody we haven't heard from, one of the
It's always the
branches
same
of
people.
government.
Maisie, what are the three branches?
One is judicial.
That's one.
Maybe another one, Morgan.
Legislative.
Yep, legislative.
Jonah.
Judicial, legislative, and executive.
And you
Great.
said, okay.
Perfect. So you guys have all three: judicial, legislative, and executive. And they're really fun to say, actually. I'm surprised no one has sort of come up with a song. Might be because they're difficult to rhyme. With these three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Now, what do the three branches of government do? Here we have the executive branch, and that includes the president and his cabinet. So the president's cabinet is not a shelf. The president's cabinet is actually comprised of secretaries of state, secretary of defense, all these different secretaries for very important things. And then we have our legislative branch over here. So we know about the House of Representatives. They represent us. And we found out who your representative was as well. The Senate, so senators we have two senators in each state. And actually my state, Washington State, we have 2 women as senators and a woman governor, which I think is like one of the first times that that's been the case. And judicial branch includes the Supreme Court. So all these different branches have very different roles but work together to get things done, or sometimes there's a lot of disagreement. For instance, in the legislative branch, there have been some really heated disagreements over various bills, various different additions to bills. So it's actually kind of fun to follow politics sometimes, and remember that all this really affects you directly. So the executive branch, we all know who the president is, I'm assuming, right?
Everybody who's
Everybody knows Barack Obama, great, is the current president. And does anyone know when the election is going to be?
raise your hand if you know any election.
You know when we will vote? This year. Okay.
2015.
No, this year.
No, it's this year.
This
What
year,
month will we
actually.
vote?
What month?
You might know what month we vote?
September.
No, Turkey week.
Oh, Thursday.
No, right, November.
November.
November. So in November 2012, this year actually, then we'll see Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, and it'll be really interesting because there's all kinds of big issues being discussed and really exciting time. So I remember when I was a little closer to your age, in 2008, I was really following the 2008 election super closely. So Barack Obama versus John McCain. And it's super fun. Just ask your parents, hey, what's going on? Ask them who they support or whether they support someone yet, and why or why not. It can be great to start a discussion with your parents about this. So what does it take to be president? Must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. So much as she would love to be president, this unfortunately disqualifies my mom, who was born in China. Natural-born, you have to be born in the United States. Be at least 35 years old. So sad for us, we can't run for president for quite a few years. Have been a permanent resident in the United States for at least 14 years. So if you were living in another country for a really long time, then you might want to come back soon. The cabinet includes all these really important things like the Chief of Staff, the Environmental Protection Agency, all these different offices that do quite a bit of important work. So for instance, the Secretary of Defense. Anyone know what the Secretary of Defense takes care of?
Secretary of Defense.
Defense. Would that be, who would take care of it?
Okay, Eddie. Army.
The Army, the military, everything that is required for defense of the nation. Great. Anyone know what the Secretary of State does? Secretary of State.
What does the Secretary of State do?
No guesses.
No guesses.
Okay, so the Secretary of State. Now, you might think from the name that they do something involving states. Well, this isn't entirely misleading. So if you think about states as like nations, the Secretary of State goes to different nations and advocates for the United States with foreign policy. So it's an international relations job. So Secretary Hillary Clinton, our current Secretary of State, goes around to different countries, like recently she was in China, and speaks on behalf of the US. So the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense involves lots of traveling for sure. Then there's things like Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Education, and they make decisions more regarding things that go on here in the United States with farming or with schools or with anything else, Department of Commerce, trade, and industry. So all these different cabinet positions that get appointed by the president have very long-reaching and important goals and missions. So I think the moral of the story is be good friends with whoever might be president next, and maybe you could be secretary of something. Of course, it might be easier to think, maybe I'll run for an elected office instead. The legislative branch of government. Yes.
Yeah, we just lost the picture.
Oh, okay.
Dial out really
Sure.
quick. Hold on. There we go.
So I wanted to take great. I wanted to take a quick poll here. Raise your hand if you're interested in maybe running for president someday. Anyone interested in running for president someday?
Nobody knows.
Do you know?
I know.
Okay, come.
Okay, a couple of people. Great. What about being a representative or senator? Anyone interested in being a representative or senator?
Being in Congress or the Senate, okay.
Okay, I'm seeing some raised hands. What about being a governor of your state? Okay, I'm seeing some raised hands. Great. Or a mayor of your city? You raised hands. Great. So some of you are already interested in running for government, making your voice heard on a very big way. Obviously, it's good that some of you are going to be running for office, otherwise we would have a lot of people, but I definitely encourage you to think about how can I have an impact in government. I don't necessarily have to be a senator or a representative, and we all aren't old enough to vote yet, but how can we make a difference? So writing letters to your representative is a great way to do that. And here's an example of a letter someone might write, or a snapshot of part of it. Okay, so this person, Maria, wrote, I think that my school should offer a vegetarian school lunch. This would give more choices to students who are vegetarian who don't eat meat, and could also have some health benefits. So this is an example issue. Now I want to ask you, what is an issue that you care about?
The issues you guys care about?
Like homework.
Or something, yeah.
Remember we were talking about it last week? Yeah, something that means something.
Nicholas.
We need more overtime for
No, they would like more homework assignments offered online instead of paper copy.
Okay, they would like more homework to be, sorry?
Offered online.
More homework to be offered online. Great. Okay, so this is a really good issue. I'm going to write it down. Okay, what else? What are some other issues you
Nicholas.
feel strongly about?
Nick,
less chores.
Less chores? Okay. What else? What are some other issues you feel really strongly about? You feel your representative might be able to help you out with?
Once you get lower.
Lower tests.
Slower tests?
No more state tests.
Oh, no more state testing. Okay. And let's get one more.
Jane.
No more cleaning our room.
No more cleaning our rooms. Okay, I'm going to add this onto the less chores idea. So we have more homework offered online, less chores, so no more cleaning our rooms, no more state testing. All right. So now let me ask you a question really quickly. Is there one thing that you really want? Because we've had a lot of no more this, no more that. Is there something you really want?
Nicholas.
For the children to be the boss of their parents.
Children to be the boss of their parents. Okay, so how do you propose that your representative could help make a bill that would make this possible? What could government do? Any ideas?
What?
You gotta have some ideas.
It's gotta be something that makes sense here too, okay, so.
Something that you want, like a privilege that you want that you don't get. Like you want a law that says you can watch TV for 2 hours every day uninterrupted by your parents telling you.
Or
Okay.
3-day school week.
Yeah. 3-day weekend. Taylor.
Sunday, Saturday,
weekend in a week. You want to go to school on Saturday and Sunday and then have 5 days off.
Oh, I see. Flipped school model. That's really interesting. Now the question is, in order to make up for all that lost time, you might have to sit in class for like 48 hours on the Saturday and Sunday. All right, I'll write this one down. Shorter school week, flipped weekend. All right, and let's see. In order to make kids the boss of their parents, maybe let's say National Day of, maybe a weekly National Day of Children Taking Charge. So this could be every single week. There would be a day where it would be instituted that you could just do anything you want. Your parents couldn't tell you what to do, and you could tell them what to do. And if you ever felt that this wasn't happening, then you could call the number, and someone would show up and tell your parents to. All right, so we have all these options, but we can only write one letter together. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands for the ideas that you really strongly care about. So we have our first one, more homework offered online. Raise your hand if you think this is a good idea. And can you move the camera to the side? I'm only seeing like a third of the students. Oh, great. Okay, sorry. So raise your hands again. More homework offered online. Raise your hands for that. Okay, great. Less chores. No more cleaning our rooms. Raise your hand for that. Okay. No more state testing. Raise your hand for that.
No more state testing.
All right. Seeing a lot of raised hands. Shorter school week. So school on the weekend, weekend on the weekdays. All right. And weekly National Day of Children Taking Charge. All right. Seeing a lot of raised hands. This is really difficult for me to gauge, actually. Teachers, could you see which one was the winner?
Yeah.
Shorter school. Okay. Shorter school week. So we're going to write this letter to our representative, and we'll just make sure that we're following the correct form. So here's like a sample letter to the representative. You just write the honorable representative's full name. So this is a really good reason why you guys should want to run for representative. You get to be called the honorable. I mean, that is an amazing reason to run for office right there. Not really, but being called the honorable is super cool. All right, so you address it. You have the date that you're writing it, the honorable representative. So if you write to your representative, it would be Tom Reed. United States House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Dear Representative blank. And then you start writing your letter, and you want to include some good reasons, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, sorry. You want to include some good reasons why you should do anything, sign off correctly. So basically use really good letter writing strategies. Now, you obviously want to be persuasive. So being persuasive means that you provide good reasoning, and that you are using good grammar, good writing, and everything. So, all right, so let's make this a little bigger. Dear Representative Reed, so our issue is this shorter school week. Now, how would we support this with reasoning? How would we make this representative think that we're being reasonable?
Remember when you're doing a persuasive writing exercise, you have to have 3 strong reasons.
Reasons why you would like the shorter school. Andrew.
Because so that kids don't get so stressed out by doing work every single day, and you at least get a break once in a while so that it doesn't cause more stress and make kids exhausted from the work.
Okay, so as a way to relieve lots of stress by having this significantly longer break, dear Representative Reed, today's students are facing unprecedented amounts of stress in our schoolwork as we contend with high-stakes tests, lots of homework, and our extracurricular activities. Let's see. Unprecedented amounts of stress as we contend with high stakes tests, lots of homework, and extracurricular activities. Okay, so we're saying that students are so stressed out, but why is this a bad thing? Why do you think that students shouldn't have to deal with a certain amount of stress?
This is me or no?
Oh, it's good for the teachers too. Okay, so you could say that this means less hours that teachers would need to work on the weekdays. That's okay, great idea. But let's go back to our first topic right here, which is that today's students are really stressed out. How do we support this?
Andrew,
Because it creates, well, since they get stressed out, they get angry and they end up getting bad grades, and then at home they can also have certain situations with their parents because of the stress.
Okay, so the stress kind of just cycles around. When you're stressed out, you get angry, you get bad grades. Okay, so
Okay.
all this stress starts a cycle of getting angry, getting bad grades, and then having to deal with, let's see, getting bad grades and then having to deal with your parents' disappointment over those grades, leading to, guess what, more stress. Okay. Scientific studies show that stress is bad for your health, especially when it is over a prolonged period. Students who go to school 5 days a week, every week, are being exposed to stressful situations on a daily basis. Okay, so we've introduced this problem here that we see as we see it, which is that school is really stressful and students who go to school every day for 5 days are being exposed to a lot of stress, which is bad for health. So now we introduce what we want to propose as a solution. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit because it seems a little bit hard to read. So what are we proposing as our solution again?
Solutions.
What's our solution?
What do you got to do?
Yeah.
Kids are gonna get more sleep and not be all confused.
Okay, so the reason that we want to implement our solution, which is this flipped weekend, the weekend being the weekdays and the Saturday and Sunday being school days, is because students will get more sleep. And how else will it benefit students?
so one is you get some more sleep. What's another reason for that? How would it benefit? Maddie?
We can play with our friends more.
We could play with our friends more, reduce some stress. Okay, now what if the representative is reading this and thinking, yeah, but then we're just trying to cram way too much onto these 2 days, and that's not very effective. What would you say in response to that?
Some kids have like daily activities that they want at school.
Okay, so some students have activities where they are learning out of school would be your response? Okay, so let's start writing about this solution that we're proposing. Now imagine that students went to school on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, while the traditional weekdays were reserved for students as break time. Students could play with friends, relieving stress, and learning interpersonal skills. Okay, here's a hint. If you want to really support your argument, throw in okay, we're going to learn how to be better with people because we're playing with our friends more, or something like this. It definitely helps if you can cite a study too. That's always good. Or statistics. Pursue extracurricular activities and get more sleep.
Adora, our
Yes.
buses are coming in, so they only have a couple.
Okay, yep, I'm going to wrap it up. So, We haven't finished this, but this is a really good sample from what we've written. We've introduced a problem, we've proposed a solution, we've supported that solution with some reasons. Next, you might say, teachers have to teach for fewer hours or on more concentrated levels, something like that. And you might include an anecdote or a quote from a constituent of Mr. Reed. So one of you guys saying, if I could have this proposed school week, then my life would be so much better, and I would get this done and that done, and all kinds of things. So writing a letter to a representative really isn't that hard. If you have an issue that you care about, it could be something in school. Like for instance, the idea of putting more homework online, and maybe having an online learning platform or something like that. Great idea. You could write to a representative about that. You could even write to a representative about something like this that doesn't seem that possible, and they might write back to you with an idea. So it's really definitely worthwhile to look at government, see how it affects you directly, the laws that are passed, the bills that are proposed, and definitely follow the presidential election. I can promise you it'll be really fun and interesting to watch. So, quickly, can I answer any questions?
If they do have any, Adora, I'll email you, okay, if they have any, and then you can get the answers back to me.
Yes, I can do that, definitely.
All right?
So, I guess if there's just one thing to remember, it's that government really affects all of us, so have a big part in it. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.